Many people go through life with a victim mentality, and rightfully so. Despite the adversities my guest today has endured, she doesn't share that belief. My guest is Laura Hoorweg. She is the founder of Spirit Speaks to Me, a spirit counselor, intuitive coach, and a psychic medium who has truly lived the unraveling and the rebirth. And she doesn't teach from theory, she guides from the ground she's walked. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, at a young age, you lived in a very physical environment, often playing peacemaker between your mom and your sister. So tell us about that time in your life.
Well, it was an interesting time because, well, let me get into the physicalness of it. I have I was talking about my older sister and my mother, and they were around the same physical size. They were very much on the same level. But though my sister was 3 years older than I was always taller and bigger and stronger. And of course, I was taller and bigger and stronger than my mom too. So I was. They were two Leos going at each other because neither one was going to give an inch of ground, and they would actually get into physical fisticuffs, and that is the most dangerous. If you know anything about physical interaction and fights, it's the most dangerous situation is where you have two equal opponents because neither is willing to give up. If you have one person stronger and one person weaker, eventually that person who's weaker figures out that they better cut this out because they're not going to come out the winner. So it was a very difficult, and they were very much not only physically alike, but, mentally and emotionally alike, so they were very, very volatile women.
Kind of what happens. They're so much alike, and
Yes.
that in line. There lies the problem, right? They're so much
Yeah.
alike.
Yeah, so, I ended up being the one to have to separate them and try to be the peacemaker, which I didn't particularly care for that position, but it was one that was foisted upon me.
Right, right. Sometimes we're thrown in those situations, but let's go back to. I remember hearing a story about when you were born because things really started for you at birth, right?
Yes. I had a very difficult birth because, I was actually full breech. And, like, a lot of people talk about breech births, but they don't understand. Full breech is when all 4 paws, your arms, your feet, and your hands are both up, okay? So, basically, you're folded in half and your butt first, which is probably the worst possible way to get born. Not to mention to have, my mother, oh, I don't even wanna think about it. But she managed to do it, and, because I was literally folded in half when I came out of the birth canal, I wasn't breathing. So they had to fool around and, try to, suction me out and try to make me breathe. So there was a pause there. I've been told this story 150,000 times throughout my life, where they weren't sure if I was actually gonna start breathing or not. And I actually looked pretty weird when I was first born, because you know how flexible the skull of a newborn is. Well, because I was folded in half, I kinda looked like a cone head. I'm going to I'm gonna date myself from Saturday Night Live because my head was very pointed because it was had been very squished. But that only lasted a couple of days, and then it went to its beautiful natural shape again. But, it was a very, very difficult birth. I always say, though, from sort of a spiritual, psychic energy joking, well, maybe not so much joking, but, that what happened and the reason I was in this breech birth is because I sort of peeked down and felt out the outside, and I decided there's no way I'm being born, so I flipped over and I started crawling back up because I didn't really wanna be born. I've said that for a long time as a joke, but I think I had set myself a very because we plan before we come into each lifetime what we wanna accomplish, the lessons and things that we wanna learn, how we wanna be to service of others, and I think I set a pretty just judging by my life, I think I set a pretty high bar in all those areas, so I think I tried to chicken out at the last minute, but it didn't work.
No, I think it's a "Here I got world, here I come, and this is the way I'm coming out, so take
Yeah,
me as I am." So, one of the other things that you say is, on your journey, you say you began at 11. And when I say that, I say because you say, you sought God, you sought the
mhm.
angels, but you didn't do this in church pews, but you did it in whispers and visions and cliffside awakenings. So explain that.
Well, I actually well, you have to understand that I didn't come into a religious family at all. My family was not religious, was not church going or anything like that. But when I was about 11, I really started this yearning is the best way I can put it, to really have that connection to spirit, to guides and the angels and God. And I was going on the information that I picked up around from people around me because again, I did not come from a religious family. So what I ended up doing is I actually went looking in those pews. Okay. I was lucky because I lived in a neighborhood where there was 6 or 7 churches basically within walking distance of my home. So every Saturday for, 6 or 7 weeks, I got all dressed up in my Sunday best. Again, I'm dating myself because people don't do that anymore. But that was the thing back then. That's what I was told, so that's what I did. And off I went to a different church every Sunday, and it was an interesting experience. I met a lot of nice people. I met some not so nice people. I heard a lot of great music, and I had a lot of different experiences because I was in all different kinds, different denominations of churches. But I realized very quickly that God and the angels were not there. So that sent me off on another direction to find my connection to spirit.
Go into detail how you said where that journey took you.
Well, I actually, because I was about 11 then, so I was got involved in brownies and then guides and like Girl Scouts for the US. And that included a lot of wilderness experiences, a lot of camping experiences, and being in the great outdoors. And I also started backpacking and canoe tripping and all these things. And what I found is I always say my cathedral is in the wilderness. And that's where I really found that connection, was through nature and through the wilderness. Not just nature, but I always say to my clients, I always want my clients to have that connection as well. Wonderful parks and woodlands and stuff locally are great, but there's a very different energy between true wilderness and a park, like a neighborhood park. But if you can't get the wilderness, the park's better than nothing. Okay, so that's the way it goes. And the reason being is it's all energetic because the more wild the place is, the less of an energetic influence has been put on it by us and by electronics and people's energies and all those types of things. So that's why I always say the more wild a place is, the more positive and the more healing the energy is. And I'm just loving having this conversation because I'm looking at the picture behind you, and it's this beautiful picture of wilderness mountains and the eagle and the whole thing. And that is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that pristine wilderness where you can look out into it and never see a house or a road or, a factory or anything like that. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how your journey started when you went to the churches to see if that's where, where you were finding everything. And I think that that was an important step for you is to go into those places to find out if that's where you were really belonged, where you felt and you found this calling out in the wilderness. That's where you found it, where you were maybe more it was more of a freeing experience there than it was. Is that sound about right?
Yeah, it does. But there's different strokes for different folks. And some people find it, a true connection within their church family and stuff like that. And that's great if that's where you find it. It's just not where I found it. So they always say one of the great spiritual sayings is there's a lot of different paths to the top of the mountain. So it doesn't really matter how you get there. It's a matter of experimenting and finding which path is gonna work for you.
Yeah. You described, you've had kind of near-death experiences, but you don't necessarily call them near-death experiences. It's kind of a in between near-death experience and astral travel, but it really began at age 15 when you were kind of out of the wilderness,
Yes.
right? You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, that was a very interesting experience because that was one of the summers that I was actually working in a Y camp and I was canoe tripping. And part of the program, the summer program, was also rock climbing and rappelling. And we were doing a rock climbing and rappelling course. And the way it works is basically you climb up the cliff, okay, and then you rappel down. So we were at the top after finishing the climb, and we were resting and getting ready, switching over equipment and stuff like that to do the rappelling section. And it was a very, very high cliff, and it was in Ontario, so it's all shield, which is all rock, ancient rock, and you looked out and all you could see for miles as far as you could see all the way to the horizon basically was forest and rivers and lakes, and it was just pristine wilderness. And because it was inside a huge state park up in northern Ontario where I grew up, and, I was just standing there, and I think that the absolute awe and beauty of the wilderness is what I think, triggered this, experience. And what happened is I was just standing there in awe, basically, and all of a sudden I felt this feeling, the only way I can describe it is it was like a whoosh, and all of a sudden I found myself and I was out of my body, and I was actually in the sky looking down on my, compadres and the instructors and myself, and I'm like, "Wow, what's going on here?" And it was a really interesting experience because there was no fear whatsoever. I just felt totally warm and safe and calm, and but I felt expanded. I felt connected to everything, but I also felt like myself. So it's not like I kind of lost my self image. It was like I still felt like an individual, and I was just getting ready to, for this incredible experience. And all of a sudden that feeling came again. It was like whoosh again. And all of a sudden I found myself outside the earth. So I'm going to date myself here. Okay. Because when I was very young is when they did the first moon landings and they did the first circling the earth in the spaceships and the astro it was the first time that anybody experienced viewing the earth from outside of the earth. And the astronauts and went on infinitum about how what a credible experience this was and I can guarantee you that that is true because it was just amazing. I saw the whole earth rotating beneath me, all the clouds, all the continents. And I was just, and again, I wasn't afraid. I was totally relaxed. I felt totally safe. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And again, I was kind of going like, what's next? And just as I kind of had that thought, it was like whoosh again. And all of a sudden, I found myself out in the middle of the universe, looking at all these incredible different spiral galaxies. And it was like I had all this knowledge too. I just looked over at this one spiral galaxy and I went, wow, that's the Milky Way. And Earth is right there on that little arm. It was just this incredible experience. And so at this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, like what is going to happen next? And just as I started thinking that way, I was totally interrupted. And it was like in Star Trek where the giant hand comes and grabs you. And it grabbed me. That's what it felt like. It was felt like a giant hand grabbing me. And all of a sudden I was just pushed, pulled, I should say, at light speed and back into my physical body. And it was really I describe it as it's like having a Coke bottle and trying to stuff a basketball into the Coke bottle. That's exactly what it felt like because I was just too expanded. My energy, my persona, my uh, soul, if you want to think of it that way, to fit back into my body. It took me 2 or 3 days to actually feel comfortable in my body again. But I found out after I sort of came to in my body that what had actually physically happened was that one of the climbing instructors had gotten a bit nervous because he felt I was a little bit too close to the edge of the cliff, and he'd literally grabbed the back of my pants and yanked me back. And so that's what stopped the experience. And I to this day, I've tried to, in different ways, try to, replicate that experience. I've come close a couple of times, but I've never been able to fully replicate that experience. So it was pretty wild. So that really cemented my ideas of what was and what wasn't life, how we were made, death, because obviously I was fully out of my body for an extended period of time and I wasn't dead. And oh, that was the other thing. This to me felt like probably about, I would say, about an hour and a half experience, but judging from what was actually happening in the 3D world, it was probably only a matter of maybe a minute or minute and a half or so, in the 3D, but it actually seemed much, much longer to me. So it was it changed the way I thought about many, many things.
No, it's interesting as you're describing this, I'm seeing this as you're being pulled to 3 different levels. Like each
Yeah.
level is a level up, you're going up a little bit further and a little bit further. And that had to been just an amazing feeling. Like you said, maybe about a minute, but all of this seems like it's taking forever. But that moment that you're pulled back and you come out of this, that initial feeling, what was that initial feeling when you came out of that?
Well, I think the biggest feeling was, there was, like, sadness, like, I don't know about sad, more kind of a sense of regret, and also that sense of being squished into a tiny little space that I didn't really belong, and I think that was the biggest thing, the feeling of being compressed and the feeling of, like, missing out on something because obviously there was some experience that was gonna come after that, right? And I never really got a chance to do that, so I was kinda ticked about that because I was really getting into these step ups, and I've even thought about that, what was the next step? Because we as humans, we can think on a universe level, but if you go past that level, I don't know if there's too many people on this planet that can really honestly say that they could kind of visualize or connect what would be beyond that level. And that's always kind of like, oh, it'd be really nice to see what's beyond.
Right. And the way you describe it, I've had guests on here explain and describe their near death experiences, but you didn't
Yeah.
have the near death experience. Yours was completely different than something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's why I say it kind of has, because I've actually talked to many people and I've read many accounts of NDEs. It has some of those aspects. It also has aspects of like what when people talk about their astro traveling experiences, and I've actually had some of that too. But it was like a combination of both, and it wasn't something that I would say was purely one or the other. Because I haven't had a full-blown NDE where I was kind of pronounced dead and then I came back, but I've been in a couple of very serious, well, definitely for sure. One of the first major car accident that I had when I was about, I was 28 or 29. And when I was almost killed, in fact, I should have been, that's a whole nother story. I was saved by an angel, but that's a whole other story. But I probably, if that hadn't happened, I would have been dead. If the circumstances had been different and I hadn't taken actions which were guided by an angel, I would have been dead in and the police officer was very blunt about pointing that out to me. the, the fact that if I hadn't had my seatbelt, the way he described it is if I hadn't had my seatbelt out that I would have been launched through the windshield. And in his words, they would have been scraping me up off the pavement and they would have been gonzo for me.
Wow, wow. So you have this experience at 15 years old. This
Yeah.
experience. How does that change you, or how does that guide you going on from that point on in your life?
Well, like I said, it really set a foundation of the way that I thought about things. Number one, the way that I thought about myself and that I thought about others in terms of what we are. It really showed me that we were way more than our body, because up until that point, we're keyed into thinking of ourselves as identifying as our bodies, and that just showed me, we were way more than our bodies. It also affected the way that I thought about death, because I was out of my body and I wasn't dead. Okay. So, it really started me thinking about the afterlife and the fact that there probably was one. Because if I could just do it for a short time when the body actually died, if I could live without a body, then when my body died, I was going to go on anyway. What else did it do? It kind of really just set up the idea in my mind that there was way more fantastical experiences that we could have, other than what we were told we could. It's probably the best way. Now, I didn't suddenly become a spirit child. 'Cause I was only 15, but, through my it definitely affected me through my teens, and the wilderness experiences sort of just added on to that, experience. But, I always say this to people, like, people think that, the spiritual journey is not a straight line, okay? It's not a graph up to the right. It goes in waves, and sometimes you're very, very engaged in spirituality, sometimes you're not. There's peaks and troughs. And, I definitely would say my 20s were a trough. Okay, I wasn't really I was too busy partying and hardying and having a good time in my 20s. But when I got into my early 30s, I started doing more and more, experimentation and searching and reading and, on spiritual topics and going to spiritual events and things like that. So I got much more into spirituality, when I went into my, 30, and it pretty much continued, on more of a straight line projection, once I was into my 30s, but it still wasn't a total, up and to the right thing, but it was much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Continuous. It was more of a continuous journey without so many peaks and valleys.
Yeah, and I know you've talked about this before in prior conversations. You weren't an alcoholic, but you did get into heavy drinking. But that also moved. You went from heavy drinking. You experienced. You got into marijuana and stuff like that. And I think this is where you talk about this whole how life just kind of shifts you into where you get into your 30s, where you really start to experience life and asking questions and wanting some answers.
Yes, exactly. It's because in my teens, it was well, I did a little bit of I had a short period of alcohol in my teens, but in my teens was more about pot. Oh my God. I smoked so much pot, you could probably fill 3 football stadiums worth of pot that I smoked in my but I will say it was self-medication, and people have to realize too, I didn't realize this until lately, but when we talk about pot, the pot back in the day in the '70s and '80s was not the same pot that's today, okay? It's hybrided and it's way, way more the degree of THC in the pot now is, like, unbelievable in comparison to what it was back in the day. And I first heard of, somebody having a psychotic break from pot, and I laughed because I didn't know that they had hybrided so much. This is when I learned how they changed pot, because that would have been unthinkable. That would have been impossible back in the day, okay? The pot just wasn't at a level. It was very safe. It really just blissed people out. It's very, very different now though, because it's so strong. It's a whole different ballgame. But, so that was kind of my teens, and in my 20s was my alcohol phase. Yeah. I'm not saying one's necessarily better than the other, because 'cause they're not. But, and I got into my 30s, and I also got into, my career. I got very career-minded and stuff like that, so I got out of being such I wasn't a wallflower, but I certainly wasn't a party girl the way I was in my 20s either.
Yeah, you had a good career. I mean, you spent 30 years in the
Yeah,
advertising
yeah.
world, and There's some things that happened in that. Obviously, one of the things that tragically happened is, you lost your life partner,
Mhm.
in this time. So, how did you decide to maybe change career, not necessarily change career paths, but walk away from the advertising world, which it seems like you've got a good job, things are going well, but
Well,
I think it is you found a purpose, right?
no, it happened a little bit differently than that. Because actually I was in advertising and marketing, but I worked in the primarily in the newspaper business. And about 11, 12 years ago, the newspaper business, because of online and everything, the newspaper business basically took a nosedive into the toilet. And it took about 5 years for that to happen, so about 5 years before that. So it was getting the newspaper business was going downhill quickly, and they kept downsizing and downsizing and downsizing, and they had been offering buyouts and stuff to clean out staff because we went from being like super busy and great big thick papers to papers that were this thick and hardly any advertising revenue. Like, people always think that subscriptions drive the newspaper business. That's totally not true. Subscriptions don't even cover distribution cost. Okay. What pays for newspapers is advertising. Okay. Everything is built on the advertising model. And that's the same actually for radio and television, if you want to know the truth. The writing was on the wall and things, and of course, as business went downhill, so did the working environment. It became more and more and more toxic. And, they offered a buyout again, and I figured this was probably the last golden handshake that was gonna be available, and I was done because the working environment had gotten so bad, and so I just said, "Write me my check and I'm out of here." And it was really wild because a lot of other people had this is the story of my life. A lot of other people had planned their exit and they planned I had no plan. I left it to the bitter end, and, I probably should have left probably 5 years before that point, but I didn't, because it's hard when you have an established career and you're making good money and you've got, all these perks and but anyway, I didn't. So I just said, "Give me my check and I'm out of here." And, then, some of the hard truths that I never thought about, because at the time, I was, like, 52, and when I left, I thought, "Hey, I've got, all kinds of experience. I did very well at my job. I can go out and get another job, no problem." Wow, didn't quite work out that way. Because I was working with, several headhunters at the time, and one of them, I developed a really good rapport with her, and she said, "Laura, I'm really not supposed to tell you this." She said, "But, I really like you." And she says, "I gotta be honest with you." And what she told me was that at the time, her clientele, which was all the people that were hiring, had told her flat out that they didn't wanna see anyone over the age of 45. And I'm like, "What? You wanna talk about ageism?" I'm like, "What?" So, anyway, so it really dawned on me in a big hurry and I also didn't wanna go back. I thought instead of being in advertising and advertising sales that I would go back more into the pure marketing end of it. And as I went into it and started doing some research, I decided that's not what I really wanted to do anyway. And then just after all this had happened, all of a sudden, this is when suddenly my partner passed away suddenly. So that just blew everything up. So I went into actually a deep personal, it's a good thing I took that check, by the way. I went into a deep personal healing journey for probably almost a year, a very intense one. So I did a lot of different things, a lot of alternative healing modalities and things like that. Because what people don't realize is when you lose somebody, a loved one who's very close to you, and it doesn't matter whether it's a partner, sometimes it would be a parent, sometimes, unfortunately, even a child or a close friend. What happens in that grief process? You're not only dealing with the grief, but it also floats everything that you've ever swept under the carpet, that you thought that you had already healed, or you just shoved somewhere and you decided that you weren't going to deal with it. All those things all of a sudden bubble to the surface. So it's not only that you have to deal with the grief and the loss of the loved one, you're dealing with all this personal, and I'm just going to call it what it is, shit. Yeah. All this personal shit at the same time. So it's a very devastating. This is why people have go into these really dark places after somebody passes away, because it's not only dealing with the grief of that passing, it's dealing with all of these other issues that come up that they haven't dealt with, or that they thought they had fully dealt with, and that doesn't, it turns out not to be the case.
Well, yeah, and you know those some of those when they get in those positions where they get in those dark places, because we've
Yeah.
been there, we've done that. And sometimes the hardest thing is coming out of that. Is how
Yeah.
do you come out of something like that? And is that something that you've encountered with your clients or with yourself? Is coming out of that darkness?
Oh, absolutely, and it's different for everyone. The only thing I really say after my own experience is you just keep trying anything and everything, because different things work. Like I did some normal things. I did some pretty off the wall things, some pretty alternative stuff. I can give you some examples. There was a trance healer in he's very famous at the time in Brazil called John of God, and he had a whole healing compound set up with all kind. And what he did is he channeled healers. Some of them were angelic, some of them were healers, doctors, and stuff from the past. And you went through all this, the mediumship of him channeling these healers, and it's a whole process. And I was only there originally, supposed to be there. I went with a group for about 2 weeks. And then I decided this was my first healing step. And I decided that I wasn't ready to go home, and I ended up setting it up, and I ended up staying on my own there for another 4 weeks. So I was in Brazil for 6 weeks. And whilst I was in Brazil for 6 weeks, I actually got introduced to synchronistically, because I don't believe in accidents or coincidence, to some people who were very experienced with ayahuasca, which I had very little. I knew about it, but I had very little knowledge of it. So I was pulled to this next thing. So I came home from Brazil, and pretty quickly, straight afterwards, I was off to Peru. And I did a 3-week intensive ayahuasca retreat, which was pretty wild, in the middle of the Peruvian jungle in Iquitos, which is Iquitos is an interesting place because you cannot drive there. You either have to go by boat up the Amazon or you have to fly in. So it's a very, very interesting place. So I spent my 3 weeks there and went through all kinds of ayahuasca ceremonies and other things. And that was pretty wild. Then I came home.
So, for those who don't understand what you're talking about, what is ayahuasca? What is it?
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. So ayahuasca is a ancient jungle medicine, and it's a combination of a root and a leaf, two different plants, and it is a hallucinogen. It's basically like DMT. It's like people would be familiar with like magic mushrooms. It is a hallucinogen, and you drink it, and so they brew it up from this roots and it's not just it also has, if you're spiritual at all, it has a spiritual energy to it, and ayahuasca is actually like a goddess of the jungle, and she appears to you, and through a couple of the ceremonies, she actually appeared to me. She can appear in like 3 different ways, the maiden, the crone, or she appears as a giant boa constrictor snake, which
Hmm.
is really fun, which is how she appeared to me. And this was one of the through one of the ceremonies, and she took me through a classic shamanic journey, which is the journey in the underworld. And it's the same thing that the Egyptians talk about. A lot of the indigenous people, the shamanic cultures, where you go into the underworld, you die, but you basically die to yourself, and then you are reborn. You come up from the underworld and back up to. So I did that several times, more than several times. because I was there for 3 weeks. So, it's not a rec trust me. It's not a recreational drug. You become very ill. It's called the purge. A big part of the ceremony is the purging, where you're basically vomiting and from both ends simultaneously at times. Um, yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest it for everyone because there's some people who just it's not the right thing for them. But I was very much guided into it. And I was lucky enough that when I did it, it was before ayahuasca, because in the last 10 years or so, ayahuasca has become one of the things, the in things to do, which is a dangerous thing. Okay. Because, all of a sudden everyone is doing ayahuasca ceremonies. I would not even think about doing that because I did it with a lifetime shaman who had studied his craft for over 40 years, and it was done in a very, very safe environment. You have to be looked after during these things because you cannot look after yourself. Since I did it, there has been major abuses of people. I don't even want to go into things that have some really bad things have happened to people. So if it's something that you feel drawn to, you just have to be very, very careful and very sure and do your research of where you're doing it. And frankly, and I felt this way from the beginning, is it's jungle medicine, so you should be in the jungle. Okay. I don't think I would ever, and I haven't, I don't think I would ever do an ayahuasca ceremony anywhere other than in the jungle. Like there's a lot of ceremonies that go on here in North America. And if that's what you feel called to, great, but that's something that I would never do.
So for
Because
those
the people, there just aren't the shamans because the shaman is the one that guides you through the journey. And if you're not properly, even in the group that I was in, a couple of people had some very scary experiences. And if they hadn't had proper help to get them through that, it would have been very dicey. And you simply don't get that by taking a little course or reading a book about being a shaman. So yeah, I wouldn't. I'd be very careful on that one. It's not, and as I said, it's not for everyone because it's very, very physical. It's extremely physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually demanding, and you have to have a certain amount of wherewithal in order to go through that experience.
What's really interesting about when you were talking about all this and is that you did the journey that you felt you had to do for you. And
Yes,
everybody's journey is different. Everybody's journey is
different.
not going to
Yeah.
go the same way you did, but you reached out, you said, I need to go find myself. I need to discover, right for myself. So you come back, you get this experience and you come back to the States. How are you feeling? And then where does it take you from there?
Well, then I came back and I had gotten heavily into before I'd gone, I had this was all part of my healing journey. It was really lucky actually just before you want to talk about synchronicity, just before my partner passed away, I had gotten deeply into yoga. And that yogic journey actually supported me through my whole healing process. So when I came back to Canada after my ayahuasca experience, I felt very deeply about my yogic practice, and I decided because I didn't know what to do, what I was going to do in terms of work or my mission, and I decided that I was going to be a yoga instructor. I felt called to be a yoga instructor. Okay. And so I thought to myself, if I'm going to be a yoga instructor, I have to fast track this thing and I have to get certified PDQ, which means pretty damn quick. It's an old saying. And so I ended up going, here we go again. I found a fabulous, really good school reputation, actually run by a couple of Americans. But the school was in Costa Rica. So I went to Costa Rica for a month to do a month-long intensive and get my yoga teacher training certificate. And it was a fabulous experience, very physically demanding experience. Okay. And not just physically, emotionally, and mentally too, because you're not just doing yoga, you're training how to teach yoga. So that's very different. Okay. So I did that and then I came home and I realized when I got home, as I have at so many other times that when I've taken courses in my life, that I wasn't really meant to be a yoga teacher, that I was doing this experience for my own healing. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that. I've done all kinds of energy healing courses and things like that throughout my life, thinking that I was meant to be a practitioner in that particular thing. And then later realizing that it was not, I wasn't meant to be a practitioner. It was for my own healing journey. So that was another part of my healing journey. So,
What's interesting about that, though, is you took the opportunity to try to learn something different.
yes.
And in the process, but each one of those adventures that you went on through yoga, ayahuasca, these are all little steps that continue to lead you to the path that you're on today. But these are crucial steps that you have to take to get you to where you're at.
So this is the other thing through this healing journey. It was like I brought both sides of my personality, of my gifts together. And this is when I decided, shortly after I got back, was that I decided that I was going to take all these things that I've learned. And that's when I started my spiritual counseling and my intuitive coaching practice. When was it? 2015. It was in the middle of 2015. Yeah, that I actually started. And in fact, it was right about now that's interesting. In 2015 when I actually started it. Yeah.
And your adversities didn't end there because during the course after all that, you actually ended up having open heart surgery somewhere in this process along the line in life. So here's the knock on your door. Say, wait a minute, here's something
Oh,
else for you.
I know. It's just like it just never stops. Well, that was I got COVID. I'm always ahead of the game. I got no, it's true. And I realized that the reason that this is what my guides told me, because I started getting ticked off about some of this stuff, because it was like, and I always seem to experience things a little ahead of everybody else. And the reason that that happens is so that I can help everybody else when they're going through the things. Okay. So what happened in 2019? Right at the end of this, just like around Christmas time, which is, how perfect can we be? I got super sick of 2019, super, super sick. In 2019, around Christmas time, I got so sick. I was literally bedridden for 3 weeks, which is like unheard of. Never happened to me in my life. I was just about to basically phone an ambulance and check myself into the hospital because became convinced that I had pneumonia, and that's why I was so weak. Well, of course, we know it wasn't pneumonia. It was the first most powerful wave of COVID-19. So here I am at the end of 2019, and as soon as the whole COVID thing hit, I realized absolutely that that is definitely what I had. And I'm actually so glad that I resisted the urge to check myself into the hospital. So if I had gone into the hospital, the likelihood that I would never have come out was very high. Not only was I deathly ill for 3 weeks, it took me over a month to get back to something even resembling what I would say my old self. And even then, I started having all these weird symptoms. And so I couldn't get diagnosed. And to make it even worse, my GP got into a very bad car accident and he had a concussion. So he was going through concussion syndrome. So he was on and off work. Plus, we're going in and out of lockdown and I couldn't get diagnosed. So finally, it was almost, yeah, it was the beginning of 2021 that I actually was able to get some testing done and everything. And luckily, my doctor said to me, he says, "Well, I really think this is respiratory, but they couldn't get me in to see a respiratory. I had to wait. There was a huge waiting line to get in and get lungs tested because of COVID, of course, right?" So he says, "I think we should get you in for a stress test just to make sure it hasn't affected your heart." So I go in for the stress test, of course, and I fail miserably, okay? I didn't even make it to the end of the stress test when they told me, "We're taking you off the treadmill and sit down." And then the cardiologist came in and he was like, "Whoa." He said, "This is bad." So I had to go in for an angiogram where they shoot the dye through your heart. And normally that's a day procedure. You go in the morning and they kick you out around noon. Well, they did the angiogram and I'm still lying on the table and the cardiologist who was doing the test, he looks at it on the screen, he goes, "Whoa." He says, "We can't stent that." He said, "You're not going anywhere." He says, "We're going to admit you." And he said, "We're going to get you on the rotation as quickly as possible." And that's when I ended up having the open heart surgery. So that was a shocker, I can tell you, because I was prepared at worst that they were going to have to put a couple of stents in, which isn't that big a deal. But when he said no, open heart surgery, there's nothing like getting sawn in half to have fun. And
Mm.
so that's the story of that.
That's amazing. So, at what point does spirit speak to me? Where does this come from in your journey?
Well, that's what I said. It was basically a decision in 2015. This is prior to what we were just talking. We're kind of bouncing back and forth. It was a decision where I decided I call it was like a calling. It was like I was basically told this is what I should be doing. And also it was both from without in terms of my guidance and also from my internal guidance because I had spent basically I described it this way. I spent 30 years in the advertising business, basically convincing people to buy stuff that they really didn't need. I can,
Mm.
people have a lot of problem. Some people have a lot of problem with that, but I don't. I haven't for a very long time. So I decided that instead of convincing people to buy stuff that they really didn't need, I wanted to actually help people make their lives work. So this was the emphasis and the impetus to start my spiritual counseling and intuitive coaching program and business because I wanted to help people actually live better lives from the
You know,
inside out. Okay, this is the other thing. Everything was doing in corporate was all from the outside in. Okay, everything. And that's really the way the majority of our society works, and especially in our Western and North American for certain society works. Everything's from the outside in, which is the absolute antithesis of the way it really works, because actually everything should be from the inside out.
what's interesting about that is you talk about working with high functioning people who,
Yeah.
we all would look fine on the outside, but inside, how many of us just have this feeling that, well, I'm doing all this, something just doesn't feel right. There's something missing. So, what do you see maybe as maybe one of the most important practices that people can really use to connect with their authentic self?
Well, I sound like a realtor sometimes when I say this, but it's like meditation, meditation, meditation. Instead of location, 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 it's meditation, meditation, meditation. Because the thing I love about meditation is there's four pillars, okay? And meditation hits all those four pillars, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And meditation hits all of those at the same time. And it's the way to it's the way to to flip that story. Instead of relying on things from the outside in, it teaches you to move from the inside out, to build yourself and connect with yourself. And that's really what connecting with your authentic self really is. It's connecting with who you really are at the base of you. And that some people think you can think of it as your heart self, your soul self. A lot of people think of it like their inner child. It doesn't really matter the label. We get too caught up sometimes in these labels. But it's really about connecting with that authentic self. And the best way to do that is through meditation. Now, the other thing I love about meditation is there is a meditation. There's so many different forms of meditation out there. There is something for everyone. My kind of go-to for most people, people who especially people who are new to meditation or people who have, had a lot of problems with meditation, I always recommend to them that they start with, guided meditation, okay? Some and again, even in guided meditation, there's a lot of different forms of guided meditation, and, it's about experimentation. Find something, that works for you. And when I'm working with somebody and I'm reading their energy and I'm connected to them in session, I can pretty much tell which kind of meditation is going to be most effective for them. But even in that, I still really encourage people to experiment because, there might be different kinds of meditation that work for you for one particular issue or kind of thing that you're dealing with. And there might be another type of meditation that works for you at a different time. And we all change. That's the other thing. You know, I've been solidly meditating, which when I say solidly meditating is I mean every single day. That's why they call it a practice. Okay. If you're only meditating 2 or 3 times a week, you don't have a practice. Okay. People get mad at me when I say stuff like that, but it's true. Okay. You need to, but the thing is, you don't have to be meditating for hours at a time. Okay. 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes is fabulous, and people starting out, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, something is better building up from something is better than nothing. And people always try to tell me, "Well, I don't have enough time." Well, sorry, okay? The what you do is you just get up, 15, 20 minutes earlier in the morning, because I always recommend the best time to meditate, if especially if you're only meditating once a day, is first thing in the morning. The reason is you set the energy for the rest of the day. Okay. Because a lot of times too, we wake up and we don't even know why, but we're in some kind of weird foul mood. We're depressed, we're angry, we're anxious, and a lot of times you don't even know why. Okay.
Mhm.
But the thing is, if you don't do something immediately when you get up to change that energy is just going to compound and get worse throughout the day. Okay. By the end of the day, you're going to be in a state. But I have woken up sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, but I'm not immune. I woken up in a horrible mood, and I tell you, I've meditated for 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and that whole energy has just totally changes. And then all of a sudden, I'm grounded, I'm centered, that energy is totally gone, and I go on and I have a wonderful day. But if I hadn't done that, it would have been a horrible day.
Yeah. We live in a crazy world. Obviously, right now, everything's chaotic. And for those out there that want to work on their inner self, but there's so many outside voices today. There's so many things bombarding us. How can people, I guess, build a deep and trusting connection with their intuitive guidance instead of listening to these outside voices?
Okay, number 1, your inner guidance or your guidance from your guides and your angels, however you wanna look at it, because though they're different, but yet in some ways they're very much connected. Anything that makes you fearful and anxious is not your authentic guidance, okay? Um, this is, people always ask me, how can I trust this, that this is my intuition and it's not just some kind of garbage that's coming from somewhere else? If it involves fear, it's not authentic guidance. If it makes you feel peaceful, makes you feel calm, makes you feel better about yourself, then you know that it's authentic inner guidance. Now, sometimes we can feel a little bit of anxiety or something because an awful lot of the time, our inner guidance is trying to make us push that envelope just a bit, get us out of our comfort zone. There's a big difference between feeling a little bit anxious, okay,
Hmm.
and being in fear, okay, and that those two things are very different. If you're feeling like you're really in fear, that is not something that you should be trusting, that is actually going to be good for you. Okay. The only time you want to pay attention fear is not a bad thing, by the way. Fear keeps us safe. Okay. I'm not talking about, like, if you're out somewhere or something and all of a sudden you feel like you're fearful and you need to get out of that situation. Absolutely, listen to that and get the heck out of there. But I'm talking about when you want to be connecting to your guidance. That it's a very different thing.
You know, you've had this unique experience going back to when you were 15 about this out of body experience on 3 different levels. So looking back on that and to where you are now, what is maybe something that you brought with you from there to now?
I think the biggest thing, honestly, is the fact of knowing that we never die. Like I'm not I have absolute I honestly I have absolutely no fear of death. The only fear I have, actually, if you want to know the truth, is of being incapacitated or damaged or like I fear injury and being incapacitated. That I fear, but I do not fear dying whatsoever because we just go on and we become something else. I have no fear of death whatsoever. And I think that when you lose that fear of death, you become so much more expansive and so much more willing to try just about anything. Because it's like that. I think the fear of death is what is the major constraint on the human race.
Mm,
Because it's not it weasels its way into us in all these different ways, and, it makes us, it helps to keep us small, it helps to keep us from experimenting, from being adventurous, from trying new things. And that's all when sometimes it doesn't even look like the fear of death until you actually sit down and think about it. But at the root of it, at the root of most of our fears is the fear of death.
mm, mm. You know, you've had some unique experiences that most people don't in life. And the way you look at things now, you've got this, you add humor to it. You laugh a lot about your life experience. But I think is important. I think laughter is an
Yeah.
important part of our daily lives.
Oh, it's
Yep.
huge, huge.
Hey, yeah. And if at all the things that we've talked about here today, if there's one thing that you want people to gather from our conversation, what is it?
Never stop trying, never stop experimenting. Because if one thing doesn't work for you, I guarantee you there's some other thing that's gonna work. And I don't care whether you're talking about healing, or whether you're talking about the type of work you wanna do, whether you're talking about, relationships. If something doesn't work, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's game over. It just means you have to try something else. And this is what I call resiliency. And I don't think there's anything more important in life, and that's why I'm still here. You know, resiliency, and it's funny you brought up the whole laughter and the sense of humor. I don't think there's anything that makes you more resilient than having a sense of humor and being able to laugh at yourself. Because some of the greatest mistakes and ridiculous situations that we get ourselves into are because of our own mistakes and our own silliness. So you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and go, "Oh shit, man, I did it again." You know, and just laugh about it and go, "I guess they're gonna do better next time," you know? And, it's basically not taking yourself, too seriously. That's another thing that in life, that really constricts people is that we just take ourselves way too seriously, way too seriously.
Mm,
Because if you
mm.
look at most things, they're absolutely hilarious. Really, even things that look really bad, you know, after when you're going through something, sometimes it's hard to have that sense of humor. But a lot of times you'll get through something and you just look back and you just go, "Oh my God, I can't believe how ridiculously hilarious that whole situation was and how I got myself into it." Or how I allowed somebody else to draw me into it, or whatever the case may be. I think being able to laugh at yourself, and I'm talking about being able to laugh at yourself in a kind way. I don't mean in a vicious kind of condescending way. And that's the same thing with everybody else. Being able to laugh with people as opposed to laugh at people.
Mm. I like that. I like that. I mean, how could you not be resilient? I mean, anybody who comes in the world butt first is ready to take on the world. So Not
I
everybody
always
can
say
say they do.
I always say I showed my best feature first.
Oh, this has been great. This has been great. How can people get in contact with you?
Okay, the best way is you can reach me through my website at www.spiritspeaks2, the number 2.me. You can email me directly if you're interested or have questions about setting up a session. It's just laurahorweg@gmail.com. And I'm sure our lovely Eagle Freedom host, because he's got, yeah, you can't see it because the wings actually coming out of the side of your head, which is quite funny, is going to put all my contact information in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, we'll
You might
we'll
want I'm just
connect it.
thinking about this, you might wanna move that
Yeah,
eagle a little bit
I like the wings on either side of me. I mean, it looks good. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been great having you on here. My final question to you is, and this is where I like to ask my guests this question. As you know, mentioned the name of the podcast is Eagle Freedom Presents. So my question to you, having experienced all the stuff that you've experienced in your life, what
Mhm.
does freedom mean to you?
Freedom, I have to remember how I used to say this. It's the freedom to, how do I say, to do to know that you've made a mistake, but to be able to do it over again. I love yeah.
Well, again, it's been great having you on, Laura. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Your humor, the way you talk about everything is fantastic, and best of luck to you moving forward, and continue to guide the souls that come your way.
Thank you so much.
All right, and for our listeners out there, what is your key takeaway? What is it that you're going through right now where you need to make a shift? Feel free to reach out to Laura and talk to her and schedule an appointment and see where it can lead you. And remember that you too can rise, inspire, and overcome. God bless.